Hello, everyone. Welcome back and welcome our new delegates joining us this afternoon. For those that are new, I'm Tom Wilkerson, the lead conference producer this year. This morning we had a fantastic start to the event, and if you weren't able to catch those sessions, don't worry. They will be available from next week right here on the platform. Like I mentioned this morning, get those pens and notebooks ready, and we'll just go through the platform that we're using today. So down below, you can review the topics for the sessions we have this afternoon and also the speakers for those sessions as well. To the right of your screen, there's a Q&A and polls tab. Please don't be shy and make sure you get involved. If you do like a question that is on there, make sure to give it a thumbs up and it'll get pushed to the top of the pile. While you do that, I'll mention if you are having any technical difficulties, there is a settings tab on the bottom right. And if that doesn't work, there is a contact us page. This morning, we had a fantastic start to the event. And if you weren't able to catch those sessions, don't worry, they will be available from next week live on the platform. Thank you again to all of our speakers today and today's sponsors, Accenture and Ernst & Young, for your support. We also have a very important feature that you should be taking advantage of, the networking tab. This can be found up top with the main platform tabs. Please open this in a separate tab so you can still listen to the sessions at the same time. You can review the attendee list, you can send messages and also set up one-to-one video meetings. Finally, don't forget to post on LinkedIn and other social media using the hashtag WIFSummit. Now, I'd like to welcome back our fantastic co-hosts, Aoife Donnelly and Breda McHugh. Ladies, I'm really looking forward to this afternoon's session.
Thanks, Tom. And as Tom said, welcome back everyone to the afternoon session of Women in Finance Dublin 2020. For those of you who might have been in attendance this morning, my name is Aoife Donnelly. I am a chartered accountant by trade, like many people at the event today. But my day job right now is running Accenture's finance transformation practice in Ireland. So that, along with my two little girls, keeps me quite busy. We have had a fantastic time today already. We've had a whole bunch of fantastic fireside chats and breakout panel sessions on a number of topics. I've been looking at stream one, and in stream one we had a really rich conversation about investment trends for 2021 and lots of good tips and hints from Eve and the panel. For those of you who missed out, there will be recordings online, so you'll get to pick up some advice later. We then went into a really great discussion around actually digital transformation, what that actually means in kind of pandemic in 2021, and actually how, you know, a really good insight into how the panelists' careers have navigated in lots of different directions to get them where they are today. So it was really inspiring. So we really had fun in stream one, and it was topped off by some really good insights from Aisling on the topic of virtual networking. So I'm all enthusiastic about my new virtual networking plan as I go into 2021. So thanks, Aisling, for that. As we go into this afternoon, we've got a whole bunch more to do and see. Breda, how are you feeling about the afternoon?
I am pumped, Aoife. Pumped. We're all fed, we've had a break, we're all good to go. Like yourself, I had a superb morning. I was jam-packed with conversations and discussions going on around me about culture, about good leadership, about authenticity, about looking after our people while we're all in lockdown. So it was absolutely amazing. I loved every minute of it. Looking forward to this afternoon. We have obviously got a superb keynote waiting in the wings. So we have Gillian from the 30% Club, which I can't wait to hear. And then we'll move into our streams. So we'll split into our streams again. I'll be taking stream 2 again. And in stream 2, I will have a mix of topics that kind of all fall into supporting all our employees, which is very close to my heart at the moment. So really looking forward to that. I'll have intersectionality and diversity. I'll have a case study on inclusion initiatives. And then I'll have something to surprise everybody. I have a wee secret up my sleeve for everybody for later on. So without further ado, I would like to go to Gillian, who's waiting in the wings. And Gillian, I'm sure, needs no introduction, but I want to do one for her anyway. And Gillian is going to be talking to us about building diversity, equality and inclusion first culture from inside out, which is, I would say, for you will agree, is very important. It's how it needs to happen. Now, Gillian's an impressive lady, but I don't know if everybody realizes the length of her career, plus that she is a board member with the RCSI Hospital Group and also a board or chair for Beaumont Hospital. So a lady that's very impressive. And just to remind everybody as well that I want everybody connecting online. So not to forget to use your hashtags. And just to remind everybody, it's hashtag WIF Summit. So hashtag Women in Finance Summit, nice and easy to remember. And make sure you contact all the speakers that you're about to meet as well. So that's what I'm looking forward to, Aoife, going into the afternoon.
Super.
Yeah. So we'll see, is Gillian ready to join us?
Good afternoon. Thank you to Aoife and Breda for that lovely introduction. And it's really nice to be with you this afternoon, wherever you're dialing in from. I joined financial services in 1979. Many of you in the audience mightn't even have been born then, but that's when I first became a woman in finance. And at that point, there wasn't one female senior manager within my organization. And when I asked one day, I was told, well, it's the marriage bar. Women left when they got married, but don't worry, it'll change, and it'll change very quickly. And for 20 years, it probably didn't change. And for 25 years, it didn't change. And even in 30 years, it started to change, but the change was marginal. And during that time, I worked my way up to a senior leadership role. I did that as a married woman with kids in a dual career couple, when most of my role models were senior or had no children or had at-home husbands. And I did it at a time where I was probably able to make that progress because I was in a support function. And I used to laugh with some of my male colleagues about being the only woman at a meeting and feeling a bit lonely. And they used to turn around and say, well, Gillian, you're not the only woman, you're the only HR person, and that's why your voice is different. So they were my introductions to diversity. They were my introductions to what it was like as a woman in finance. But I'm really glad to say that things have changed, and things are definitely changing for the better. And in the last 5, 6, 7 years, the financial services industry has been one that has really worked to make a change, and to make that change from the inside out, rather than it being forced from the outside in. And there's some of the things that I want to talk to you about today. I can't solve the problems of the world in 20 minutes, but hopefully when you come away from this session, there will be one thing that I will have said that you'll have written in your notebook to say, that's the point that I want to remember today. And I have said, I started in financial services in 1979, and that's where I have stayed for 40 years. And the Central Statistics Office tell me that I live within a population of 115,000 people. And that's a hell of an industry. And in that 115,000, 54% are female. And even though we have made so much progress and made so many strides, we still find that less than 30% of the senior leaders are female. And we have no idea in terms of ethnic origin. We have no idea in terms of ability and disability, and we have no idea in terms of sexual orientation. But as I said, what we do know is that the tables are turning and life is changing for those of us within financial services. And why is that happening? Well, I suppose the easy thing to turn around and say is, as an industry, we know that diversity and inclusion is not just the good thing to do, it's the smart thing to do. Gender diverse companies are 24% more likely to outperform less diverse. Ethnically diverse companies are 33% more likely to outperform than less diverse. But there's also two other things that I talk about when I talk about the business case as I work my way through the 30% club. And the first is around the role and the power that we have within financial services. Because firstly, we can change ourselves. But secondly, we have a really important voice in terms of the role we take in the investor community. And we see great examples with the likes of BlackRock, the likes of State Street, the likes of Goldman Sachs, and the power and the influence that we can put across, not just in our own industry, but in other industries. Because the reality of it is money talks. And when money talks, change happens. The other thing I talk about in terms of the business case is something that I think is a little bit more specific to financial services in Ireland. So when I started getting involved in the diversity agenda about 5 years ago, a lot of the messages were coming from America, and the messages were very much around, you really need to do diversity because that's where competitive advantage comes from. And actually within the organization I was working with at the time, we realized very quickly that competitive advantage is easily lost. And if you're the only one investing in diversity, you're investing in a talent pipeline for everybody else. Whereas actually, if we could collaborate together in a small economy like Ireland, we could look at investing in the industry for competitive advantage, and also to a situation where those that weren't investing were at a competitive loss as opposed to a competitive advantage. And that's the spirit I've always enjoyed behind the financial services group within the 30% Club, this idea about collaborating to make the industry a better place. And what do our numbers look like? I'm not going to dwell on the numbers because you know what they are, but this is something that we took from research in the 30% Club, looking at the industry. And you can see 4 levels down from CEO, we're at 54%, and at CEO, we're at 13%. And look at how the numbers change at each stage. But what really surprised us was new research that came out from McKinsey's this year, because we always thought the big gap was at 2 levels down from the CEO in senior management and executive. But what McKinsey's tell us is actually the biggest drop occurs at the very first step, at that very first rung, where men are more likely to make progress than women. And if we can't resolve it at the first step, when can we do it? So what I wanted to talk today very quickly, and then I'll move on to something that I'm probably a little bit more passionate about, is the strategy that we're seeing across our financial services leaders. And there's lots of different ways that organizations can look at their D&I strategy, but actually we see most of it falling in within 4 headings. So we see senior leaders talking about leadership, talking about engagement, talking about talent, and talking about infrastructure. And leadership is really where it starts. So we're really fortunate within financial services in Ireland that we have so many of our senior leaders, and I mean CEOs as senior leaders, talking about raising awareness, talking about their commitment to action, but most importantly, building it into what they're talking about around purpose and around business strategy. We're also seeing that, unlike some other people initiatives that we see across the industry, it's starting very much top down, but also bottom up. So we're seeing a much greater sense of engagement around getting employees involved, looking to hear the voice of employees, and then ultimately having our employees go back out as advocates and advocates for change. Talent is the big issue. It's the #1 issue that all of us face in terms of challenges, and talent has actually been a great driver in terms of diversity and inclusion. Talent in terms of repositioning our branding within our own organizations, talent in terms of attracting talent in the first place, and then also talent in terms of retaining it and progressing that talent through the organization. We know from data from the CSO that 60% of our senior executive roles are filled from within organizations. So the more we can focus on talent pipeline from start to finish, that's what we need to do to make a change. And then finally, infrastructure. And for me, infrastructure is where the rubber hits the road. So we can talk in big terms about things that we want to engage with, things that we want to happen. how we want to approach talent. But unless we think about how our organizations actually work and function, it becomes very hard for that to happen. So infrastructure for me is around three things. It's around the policy that we want to set out. It's around the processes that make that policy happen. But ultimately, it's about the experience that the employees feel and live, both in their own perspective, but also from the perspective of their people leaders who help deliver on those experiences. And we can have great leadership, great engagement, great objectives around talent, even great policies. But if the policies don't work for us on a day-to-day basis, then we have failed. So let's have a look and see where this failure happens in reality. And I took this out the other day. I could have picked from dozens of examples, but this one was just really current, and I love the work that Deloitte do in the employee space. But this is one of the surveys that we're all seeing every time we go into social media at the moment. And it talks about the current COVID situation and the impact that it has had on women. And we see more and more of the headlines around the impact on women rather than the impact on men. And some of these figures are really frightening. 1/3 of women said their workload have increased because of the pandemic. 46% say they need to have the feeling of being always available. And half of those said that they felt overwhelmed. And this for me is a really good example of where process and experience can have a mismatch. And this is where we have the power to change the narrative. So how do we talk about some of the good things that COVID has brought? How many of us have saved time with less commuting? How many of us have been able to have breakfast and dinner with our kids because we're just in a totally different space? How many of us haven't had to get on a plane? How many of us have saved time moving across meetings across the day? And there's some of the narratives that we could be talking about, because to be honest, the negatives are within our power to change. So I'd probably ask you two questions to think about in terms of your own organization. So the first question is, have you really gone to agile working? Or have you just replaced the office with your kitchen counter and all that's changed is the technology and you've become a remote worker? So are all your meetings at the same time? Are all your structures the same? Or have you really thought about agile in terms of how we work, the work itself, and more agile leadership? Because they're the things that drive the experience. Or the other question that I'll ask, how many of you worked on Sunday? And how many of you worked on Sunday through choice or through situations where you felt you had no choice? So I will put my hand up and say, I worked on Sunday. I woke up on Sunday morning. I felt really creative. I had a document that I had to write, so I did it. That's within my choice. But I tried really hard not to send any mails to anyone because I didn't want anyone else to feel that they had to be permanently switched on and read mails on Sunday just because I wanted to work. And that's what I mean in terms of we have the power to change the narrative. We have the power to change the experience through our behaviors. And behaviors is what I want to talk about today. And I want to talk about 5 behaviors that maybe you don't think about on a regular basis. The first is one that we talk about a lot, unconscious bias. Everybody talks about it. Everybody is doing training in terms of unconscious bias. But I will say 2 things about unconscious bias. The first is that we're learning that unconscious bias training changes nothing. Moving a bias from unconscious to unconscious has no impact unless we change our behaviors. So if you're looking at unconscious bias within your organization, think about how it converts into a plan. The second thing I'll say about unconscious bias is that so many of the biases aren't covered in conversations. So yes, we talk about gender, we talk about race, we talk about sexual orientation. But when do we talk about class? When do we talk about education? When do we talk about culture fit? because these are the things that we all look at within our organization. And where do we talk about the new things that have come through in the COVID world? Where do we talk about those who aren't comfortable on technology, those who stay quiet in a Zoom call? And are we creating brand new in-out groups where the former in-out groups are now much more comfortable in a COVID world? And they're the things we need to watch for. Unconscious benevolence is where we start to kill people with kindness. Are we still setting our behaviors around making assumptions that we need to make life easier for certain groups over other groups instead of asking them? And my best example was, I worked with a really fantastic executive a couple of years ago. He had been to one of my talks and he came to me and he said, Gillian, I have 3 fantastic women on the career track, but because of where their kids are at the moment, I can't move them into better jobs and bigger jobs. What can I do in the meantime? And I was just about to get into sponsorship and mentoring and all those other great things. And I said, whoa, would you have this conversation about 3 great men on the promotion track? And why can't they step into bigger jobs? And is it our fault because maybe we've structured the jobs in the wrong way? And can we look at this from a different perspective? And he came back 6 months later, having promoted already 2 of the 3, and said it was just such an enlightening way to have a conversation with his key talent, rather than assuming that we need to kill people with kindness. And we need to watch this over the next couple of months as more and more of our teams talk about part-time working or flexible working or reduced hours, or even sadly in some cases redundancy. How do we make sure that we are not killing a talented audience with kindness when we should be finding ways to change our process? Sponsorship bias is the third one I talk about. And sponsorship has come up quite a lot lately. We talk about the difference between mentors who talk to us, coaches who talk with us, and sponsors who talk about us. And so many of us turn around and say, there's no sponsorship program within our organization, but trust me, there is. Every organization has some form of sponsorship. Every organization has people who talk about other people when doors are closed. So what does that look like in your organization? When the conversations are happening over the next couple of weeks around performance review ratings, around salary increases, around career progression at year end, do you talk about everybody, or do you just talk about the people that you see the most often? And do you talk about people objectively, or do you talk about different groups in different ways? And this is where behaviors can really make a difference. The fourth one I talk about is the extra I. So we're very used to talking about diversity. We're very used to talking about inclusion, but I like to talk about influence, because we can have diversity, we can have inclusion, but if we don't have change in the roles of influence, we can't move forward. And everybody talks about definitions and invited to the party and dancing. For me, it's very simple. Diversity is the numbers. It means I'm here. Inclusion is the emotions. It means I'm heard. Influence is the power. It means I can make a change. So where does your D&I policy stop? Or does it go as far as the extra I? And then finally, we need to change the brand. The brand in financial services is not where we want to be. It's still seen as masculine. We need to have more women visible. Young girls thinking about financial services need to see it to be it. We need to talk about a career less ordinary, because sadly, financial services is complicated, but it's complicated in a way that so many people never get to understand the amazing breadth of jobs. We still see it as a teller in Grafton Street, whereas behind the scenes, there are so many areas of specialism where you can build a career. And that links into the point that as an industry, we probably invest more in pipeline talent and growing our own talent than any other industry, but we don't talk about it enough. And then finally, we need to be really conscious of our brand, particularly with the younger generation, to show that we are responsible employers, and responsibility is one of the behaviors that we really want to focus on. I can't change the world, in 18, 19 minutes. But what I can talk about is the fact that organizations and industry are realizing that diversity and inclusion integrates into everything else that we do. It's not something that stands apart. So what we see within our organizations, they're now looking at diversity within culture, within the values that we want to talk about, within the policies that we want to change, within the processes in terms of how we deliver them, and finally within the experience of the employee. And it's not just from the inside out. We're also lucky that we've so many things happening from the outside in. So we have the central bank as our regulator actively talking about culture, and not culture as a myth, but culture as something tangible. And we have groups like Sandra Healy and her team in DCU actually looking at helping us in terms of measuring culture with their new work in Inclusio. We have Ireland for Finance talking about diversity as a strand. We have a Women in Finance Charter for Ireland on the way, where Irish employers are going to put their money where their mouth is and talk about targets and talk about commitment to change. But ultimately, it is about experience. The very first meeting I had about diversity and inclusion, one of my colleagues said to me, I'm doing this for the next generation because diversity is going to take a while and I'm not going to be here for long enough. And I'm sorry, but that wasn't good enough for me. Changing the numbers might take a while. It's not going to take another 40 years because I don't have another 40 years. But inclusion can change now. Roles of influence can change now. Behaviors can change now. There's 115,000 of us. If we change just one thing within ourselves this week, if we change one thing a week before the end of the year, that's how change from inside out happens. Thank you very much. And I'm going to hand back to Aoife and Breda now for their questions.
Well, that was fabulous, Gillian. I loved everything that you said there and agree with everything that you said there as well. Some of the pieces that I have taken away from it were around women being visible, because we can't be what we can't see, and how that is so important. And that's why events like this are so important, because we get to showcase women who have super expertise, experience, and are making changes in the world. And we want everybody to see that so that we get more of that. So thank you so much for a fabulous session. We have some questions that have come in now, Gillian. So we'll do a little bit of Q&A, yourself and myself now. The first one being around targets, which I know is one that comes up quite often for us. So what is your view on the value of diversity and inclusion targets?
Thanks, Breda. It is one that comes up on a regular basis. And if I let people into a secret, I don't always talk about this very often, but at the very first meeting of the Diversity and Inclusion Board in AIB that I was chairing way back when we were at the beginning of our conversation, one of the guys on our group, Roger, said, well, when are we doing targets? And he was nearly murdered by the women in the group, because we all said, we won't, it will never happen. We don't want to be targets for tokenism. And 12 months later, we were all, without exception, saying, when are we going to do targets? I've come around to the idea, and to be honest, it didn't take very long. And I suppose the reason I came around to the idea of it is that this is a business strategy. And in business, what gets measured gets done. And to be honest, if you really want to have a step change, which is what we needed 4 or 5 years ago, targets are the way to happen. I will say I don't like quotas. So for people who sometimes ask me what's the difference, a target is something you set yourself internally. A quota is something that is put upon you. And I don't think quotas always drive the right behavior. It's about getting to the number, but it's not about sustainability. Whereas target setting, particularly when you control it yourself, it can be much more sustainable. And I think we also have flexibility to talk about targets, not just in terms of numbers, but in terms of process and flows. So if setting a target is too big a step for your organization in terms of senior numbers, you can start by setting targets around applicants, around shortlisting, around lots of different ways. I do think it's really important that when we talk about targets, we talk about merit at the same time, because sometimes there is a perception that filling a target means that you're abandoning all forms of merit, which firstly is so unfair on the candidates, but it's also not true. And I think when you have to make a step change, what I like to say is women who step up to targets are never tokens, they're pioneers, and that's how we have to have a look at it. I think eventually targets will disappear because we won't need them anymore. But for now, I think they're a necessary business essential.
Yeah, and I would agree with you, because I've seen the same thing. They're a way to get us sort of into a balance where we then can go forward with a decent gender balance in place in our organizations, which would be fab. So super response to that. Thank you, Gillian. And I have another question for you here as well. Where do you see networks like the 30% Club having an impact on cultures in the workplaces?
Oh, that's an interesting one. I hadn't thought about that one before. I think there's a huge role to play. And if I talk about it, maybe just from the point of the 30% Club, because we're a little bit different in that it's not individual members that join a club. It's actually a global campaign that is supported by very senior leaders. So if you take a group like the 30% Club, our supporters are chairs and CEOs of the medium to largest organizations that you can see across the world. We're now in 16 chapters. You know, we have companies that are members worldwide. It's very much a business-led agenda, which really gives it a powerful voice at government level, at financial level, at business level. But what it does in terms of making change, and which is why I got involved with the 30% Club and like so much about it, is that it encourages collaboration. And it comes back to the point I was making in the presentation. You learn very quickly that if you do D&I by yourself, you get competitive advantage for a very short space of time, and then you're just feeding everybody else's talent pipeline. Groups like the 30% Club that are open to collaboration and open to sharing, they can really achieve shortcuts in an industry in terms of taking the best that everybody is doing rather than everybody starting from scratch. And then I think probably the last thing that it does is it also helps us move beyond just the initial issue. So if I take the 30% Club, we make no secret about the fact that we focus on gender. But when we talk about gender and we talk about women, which make up just over 50% of the population, we don't talk about just one type of woman. We talk about all women, which at a business level gives us a great opportunity to talk about intersectionality, which I know is coming up on a later panel today. But if we're changing the dial in terms of women and we focus it on all women, it means as a business community, we can start to talk about gender, but we can also talk about race, education, sexual orientation. It's not just one particular type of woman. It's not just one particular type of change. But as I said, groups like the 30% Club give great focus for collaboration, and that really makes a difference.
Yeah, and I love that point about not just one type of woman, it's all of the women. It's trying to include everyone and then work on that gender balance for everyone's benefit. And I have another question for you here, which I I love these questions. How do you engage men in this conversation?
Oh, that is always the question that I think should be asked at a forum like this, because the chances are all the women in the audience already know the answer and they already know what we're talking about. And I think it's great to be asked that question on International Men's Day. So a good balance. I have learned throughout my working career and in my work with the 30% Club that actually we only make progress when we work together. And I also say this as a HR person, if it's a HR woman trying to solve diversity, it can't be done. It has to be done by men and women on the team working together, and both voices have to be important. And that again is something that we've always looked at within the 30% Club. So all our supporters are chairs and CEOs. So that means 80% of our supporters are male. So we are very much in favor of the male voice. Our patrons are Mary and Martin McAleese, who both wanted to join as patrons together because again, they felt that both voices were needed. And probably the really interesting thing for me, so much about the diversity agenda when it's done right, is about changing the system. It's not about changing the women, and that's really, really important to keep in mind. And when you're changing the system, you're changing it for the benefit of the men and women within the system. So this morning's topics, for those of you who were in stream 2, there was so much great conversation around agile working and balancing our lives in a post, or I was going to say a post-COVID world, but we're not post yet. But when we did all our research across all the different industry groups, it was amazing that agile working came out as the #1 enabler for career progression, but it came out as the #1 for men and women. And what we saw was both the men and women at home want to change their lives. They want to change their balance at work. It's not just about a solution for one half of the population and not the other. And then probably my final point, and sometimes if I'm out doing conversations, younger men in the audience come back and say, but Gillian, my career is over because all these women are going to get the jobs. And I think that's such a sad place for them to be. For me, diversity is not a zero-sum game. It's not a case that one group wins because another group loses out. It's about balancing the playing field for everybody and progression for everybody. So yes, let's have more men in the conversation.
Yes, and I agree, wholeheartedly agree. So if we have guys on today, we want to hear from you and we want to get you involved in our networks and involved in all the work that we are all doing. So don't be shy, we need you. And we think you'll enjoy getting involved in some of the discussions that we have, some of the work that we do behind the scenes. Gillian,
absolutely,
it's a pleasure to have you today. Thank you so much for your time, your energy, and all of that expertise that you shared with us.
Thank you very much.
So we're going to be going now into our streams, folks. This is where we split again like we did earlier for those of you that were with us this morning. And we have 2 streams for you to choose from. We have stream 1, which Aoife will be looking after, and I'll be heading off shortly to stream 2. Stream 1 will be focusing on technology and the business of tomorrow. They'll be talking about fintech and the future of payments. While in stream 2, if you want to come over there with me, I'll be talking about the intersectionality of diversity. And we'll also have a case study on how you can do inclusion initiatives well in your companies and your organizations. So that's your options. Don't forget you can swap in and out of the streams as well as we go. And don't forget to do some posts for me using the hashtag WIFSummit. And I'm off now to stream 2. So over to you, Aoife.
Thanks, Breda, and thank you so much to Gillian for your piece and that really interesting Q&A at the end. I actually have a number of sound bites I've written down from even just the Q&A at the end. I think I'm going to make a meme of change the system, not the women. Loved that one. And diversity isn't a zero-sum game is exactly, I think, the underlying and fundamental message that, you know, everybody should hear, be they male or female. So that was super, Gillian. Thank you so much. Moving on to stream 1 for the afternoon. Stream 1 for the afternoon is entitled The Technology and Businesses of Tomorrow. And it's really going to focus actually on some of the topics that we already discussed this morning. The first fireside chat is going to be called FinTechs to the Rescue, which is obviously quite a bold statement. And we have, we're going to be in the company of a fantastic panel there who are going to take us through some thoughts on that. The second topic in the afternoon is going to be called the future in payments, which some of us have a professional interest in, but all of us have a personal interest in, because how we use our digital wallet is kind of fundamental to how we get through the day these days. So very much looking forward to that as well. If you'd like to move to stream 2, if you can go ahead and do that now. And those of you that would like to stay in stream 1, just stay where you are. Okay. And don't forget the repeating statement I've made throughout the morning. Don't forget our social media, hashtag WIFSummit. And don't forget that the Q&A, keep the questions coming, because that's what our presenters really, really love to get. So moving into our first fireside chat. So we're honored to have a very, very, very deep and wide individual who I would describe as a futurologist in the space of fintech. Jesus Sonoma is and his panel are going to take us through some key questions around the future of fintech. And I'll hand over to you now, Jesus. Really looking forward to this panel.
Thanks, Aoife. My name is Jesus. I head the digital and fintech team at Grant Thornton. This panel will be about fintechs to the rescue, this fireside chat. Before we jump into it, let's do some quick introductions around the panelists. Gillian and Alison are joining us today for this interesting conversation. Alison, do you mind giving us a quick introduction about yourself and your company?
Yeah, I head up the London branch for a German bank called WIFIreland Bank. We're a bank that has a core focus on helping fintechs to grow portfolios of loans and to enter new markets and new geographies in partnership with us.
Fantastic. Gillian?
I'm the CEO and co-founder of Cerebrian Technologies. We're an Irish-based company trading into predominantly the UK, and we specialise in the non-performing loan sector, particularly for consumer debt.
This should make for a very interesting panel with 2 different views. Let's see now how it kickstarts fintechs to the rescue, guys. So what do you guys think in your view the fintechs done quite well, to help during COVID? Alison, do you mind kickstarting us?
Yeah, sure. It's been a really interesting year, and I think the title for this session, "Fintechs to the Rescue," is really apt. Whilst it's been a year with a lot of threats to various sectors of the economy, I think it's been a real opportunity for fintechs to show what they're capable of. There's been a huge increase in adoption of digitization of financial services. Cash is no longer as safe as it was from a health perspective. So that's been an incredible opportunity for the fintech sector. Specifically what we've seen, we're partnering with lending businesses. We've seen a huge opportunity for the fintech industry to be a part of the liquidity solution for SMEs during this year in participating under government schemes across Europe.
That's great, Alison. Jill, you want to drop in there as well?
Yeah, for sure. I guess we're quite a small company, and so I think the fintechs to the rescue, I'm pretty sure there's not a single company out there that hasn't gone back to the drawing board within the pandemic. But I guess it shows the real power of, the agile the fintech out there. I mean, we were able to change our technology within a month. And for me, the big area that we're seeing so many coming in is particularly in the debt and the collection space, because so many people were affected. This has been global. This is not sector specific. And I guess it's offered a huge opportunity for those who have the innovation and I guess the ability to change rapidly.
That's great, guys. So as usual, we always going to talk about payments, which we started talking about lending, right? Is that the opportunity you guys also see for the next 3 to 5 years for fintechs? Julie, maybe you can start with that debt angle as well.
Yeah, sure. Definitely. I mean, obviously, contactless payments have exploded over the last number of years, and anybody who works in the open banking space will be very familiar with how much better the detail is coming through on those type of payments. It has, in the debt space, opened up though huge questions around is this the right way to go? Like, a lot of people don't actually have the ability, they don't have bank accounts, and there's still a huge reliance on cash. And I think migration of those people and solutions for those is a huge, huge opportunity. I do think, for me though, when it comes into lending and payments and recovery, one of the big areas that's really great to see traction grown in is actually lending being assessed on income and expenditure. Basically household budget, bandwidth, resilience, those terms are really creeping up, as opposed to just use credit risk scoring. Anybody who operates in the space will know that sometimes the data is very outdated. And I think particularly with COVID, you're looking at different behavior profiles, how people perceive debt, and also what they prioritize as expenditure in their lives. So there's huge opportunities here for people basically to come in, particularly in the lending space, with new financial products that are very specifically targeted to certain people and to certain consumer groups.
Yeah, that's an opportunity that we really see on the institutional investment side, that where fintechs can really add value is in certain niches. So things like near prime consumer lending, where you can enhance a traditional method of underwriting with that open banking income and expenditure data, I think is going to bring to market much better products for consumers. Plus, at the same time, you've got the fintech approach of creating a far better, far more frictionless customer experience when you're going through the journey of getting a new financial product. It's something that the fintechs can add a huge amount of value.
As the audience is Irish based, let's even look at Ireland as a context, right? What do you guys see the immediate opportunities for Ireland? Alison, maybe you can pick up on that.
Well, I think Brexit for sure is a huge opportunity for the Irish market. We've seen some really big names come into the Irish market in 2020, and I'm sure that will continue. So London is sadly losing some of our fintech superstars to the Irish market. I think it's a huge opportunity to create a new European hub for fintech within the EU in Ireland, but at the same time, there's the opportunity to foster homegrown talent and help grow that a bit more as well. Gillian, I'm sure you've got some great insights sat in Ireland.
Yeah, I think for sure the fact that we could be a hub, and you are seeing a huge amount of migration of companies across. For us though, I guess my expertise would be on the homegrown. We're the Irish company that is grown and looking to international markets. I think Ireland definitely have been slower in terms of our regulation and our access to large financial institutes. You know, the UK is definitely much more approachable to younger companies in terms of sandboxes, even working with the regulators, because you know, our perception is that when you go into a large financial institute, these are basically opportunities for them to prove business case. You know, you're de-risking across the board, whereas those instant access, instant sandboxes aren't as available in Ireland. And I think it's something that the regulators and the governments really need to look and invest in, because it is an area of growth for the country. I mean, we've really great agricultural tech, we've great med tech, particularly along the western coast. But if we want to be a real leader in financial services, then it is up to the government to basically make packages available for those operating in this space. And as you say, Alison, there are companies moving over. It's fantastic, you know, to see, and that there will be employment. So that also, we need to supply resource into basically those companies and ensure that they have, you know, the employees that they can get them, you know. So continuously making sure that we're actually managing the supply chain involved in keeping those centres going.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. A strong pipeline of talent plus strong regulator support will be really fundamental to Ireland being able to capitalise on that opportunity. And the regulatory sandbox has been a huge success in the UK and continues to be a big driver for the industry. So hopefully we'll see the same coming from Ireland.
Yeah, and I think it's a chance as well for us to really look at some of the areas that, like particularly in our space, the insolvency regime, our courts are still involved, which causes it makes any sort of resolution very, very slow, very stagnant, and actually stops attraction of investment coming in, because if they can't get rid of assets, it's a very lengthy process to recover on it. So when you have, any sort of recession, there's always an investment in collections and recoveries. And so I think even at a national level, it's an opportunity for us to really, really look at our legislation around recovery.
We touched on the big B, right? the Brexit. I think the 1st of January, that could be seen as an opportunity now. I know Ireland has acted slowly in the past, but I think now we're getting our ducks in a row to see is there an opportunity for Ireland on the back of Brexit. Gillian, maybe you can shed some light there on the opportunities you see on the back of Brexit. Since
For sure. Absolutely. I think, we'd be very foolish to burn any bridges with our nearest neighbours. Our ecosystems are so interdependent on each other that making sure that those relationships go is just and continue to grow is just absolute key priority. I think there will be a huge amount of turmoil, and in any sort of turmoil, while people are getting things in place, there's opportunity for innovation. Specifically for Ireland, I do think that attraction of companies, Indigenous growth of companies, but also the challenge to Irish companies to look for other markets. Coming up through as a startup, the UK is this huge market to you, and huge opportunity, and it's an amazing space to trade in. It really and truly is. But there is now a challenge on earlier fintechs to look to other markets and look to the EU maybe ahead of with the UK, just because it might potentially be easier at the moment. So that challenge and that drive is always really great for the country, because it's global, it's expansion, it's export. So I think there definitely will. As a local, like I live in a very rural part of Donegal, we're a border county, and so I can see the flip side of small businesses when the currency fluctuations, customs, all those unknown things are causing, a lot of anxiety, I guess, for businesses, and worry and stress. But as I said, with every change in a market and change in something, there is huge chance for innovation.
100%, and I think Alison, you touched on one very interesting point, that Ireland as a gateway for Europe. I think that's a very, very interesting point, and as an opportunity. And you actually have the angle from Germany as well, one of the big European superpowers, and UK where you're based. So it would be great to see if you can shed some light around the opportunity.
Yeah, it's a great role to sit in, sitting in the UK, but being employed by a German bank, I get to see both sides of the coin, as it were. So I see all of the development and the innovation that has come out of the UK market. I see the very quick adoption of digitization in financial services that the UK population is really great at. A new idea comes up and it's got really good popular support, which has been a lot slower on the continent. I think there's less trust on the continent of anything new surrounding money. It's interesting going across to Germany. Quite often it's difficult to pay with a card. Chip and pin is definitely the way forward rather than contactless, and cash is still really, really important. But there is a lot of signs that the continent is catching up with the UK in terms of that penetration of fintech innovation. And the continent is a massive, massive market. So there is so much opportunity that fintech has only just started to touch the sides on the continent. And looking at the opportunity for Ireland has got this fantastically close relationship with the UK. it's so easy for people to, from a workforce perspective, even commute between the UK and Ireland very easily. So it really is a natural gateway into the rest of the EU, where you can rely on your ability to passport your license across the different jurisdictions of the EU. You've got the benefit of being in the single currency, which really makes a difference in terms of raising institutional investment and launching new products and new markets if you're not having to think about FX exposures. So there is a huge opportunity for Ireland to create that pivotal gateway role.
I'm excited about it as well. I think Ireland has a balance of the two, the agility that we get from the UK and the governance that Germany has and is known for. So combining those two could be an interesting ingredient as a gateway for Europe. Let's zoom in on specific verticals of fintech to see, where the opportunity could lie on those verticals. I'll share this one with you, Gillian, first. Wealth tech, tell me what opportunities you see in wealth tech in specific, let's say for Ireland.
We do need to look to the UK. There's so much growth in that space over the last number of years that I think Ireland needs to start adopting it. It does, for me, come from, I think, attitude as well to new, as you say, Alison. I know from working in the insolvency space, our attitudes to credits, even between Ireland and the UK, is completely different. And I mean, absolutely light years apart. Whereas, and the same is very true even for wealth management, adoption of tech is very, very real in the UK, but it hasn't got that foothold yet in Ireland. And so I think there needs to be something in and around the attitude and the appetite for change and for growth. And so, yeah, really trustworthy products with a lot of reputation and credibility, I think will make massive, massive leaps ahead in the future.
We know that $1 in $4 is spent by insurance companies on digital transformation. And also, I know you have some interesting views on how insurance actually is led through COVID, and there have been some innovative personalized products for insurance. Could you share some of the insurtechs that you saw that are quite exciting?
Yeah, I think there's some really interesting new insurtech businesses, particularly on the continent. Actually, we've seen some interesting models that the likes of Alan in France are creating a whole different approach to personal health insurance that is really, really interesting. It's an industry that is really ripe for a shake-up, and it's great to see fintech pushing forward in driving that shake-up. Really difficult market to penetrate, really high barriers to entry, but it's great to see that there are some early stage fintechs out there who are doing interesting things.
I totally agree, guys. I think this has been an opportunity for reinvention and digitalization, really rethinking products and services in for financial service providers, but also how do you reach the consumer and personalize the products. And I like that alternative credit scoring element as well that we touched on initially. Gillian, maybe you can expand on that, because I think there has been some interesting products really spinning out from that particular space.
Yeah, and there's, huge traction that it's coming into a lot of different parts. So usually people associate lending, when you say it in general, is normally your core banks, your prime lending. But actually this is across the whole ecosystem of subprime to doorstep, all of that type of thing. And basing it on credit reporting, there's so many people that don't actually have a credit history, that they have never had bank accounts. And I think, how do they spend their money? How do we get access to that? Actually looking at what is financial resilience, to me, is going to be the huge. It's not just about can you afford something or not. It's actually about your resilience going forward. And are you resilient to shock? Are you resilient to losing your job? Are you resilient to, because no matter what, when you look at insolvency, the vast majority of it is overspending. It's not to do, this is an unusual situation where you have mass unemployment. And usually it's, there's often things due to illness or breakdown of the marital home. anything like that, they're shock events, whereas by and large, it's usually overspending. And so I think we'll actually get a huge amount of better budgeting tools, you know, and better things around education, gamification of this in the consumer space. And I think there's massive opportunity, especially to take in from the different types of devices that consumers interact with and build this into basically credit scoring and appetite for risk, which I'm sure once it goes into lending, will start appearing in insurance and all the rest. But yeah, I think across the board, it's not just about financial products, it's about getting that 360 consumer view and really building in their appetites.
That's great. And I know the panel is about fintechs to the rescue, but Alison, you actually look at resilience as well because you actually collaborate with fintechs in lending them some capital. So maybe you're looking at alternative things as well and how you analyze these fintechs, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And their ability to come to the rescue is a prime focus at the moment for any new client transactions. So it's really interesting what Gillian is saying about looking at consumer resilience and about fintech providing the tools to help educate people on financial management and to help them become better credits. And fintech, I really see as leading the charge on that. It's going to be a really nuanced market to lend into over the next 18 months. And we in particular are looking at the right niches where you can present borrowers with a product that suits their needs, that is at a fair price to them, and represents an adequate risk-adjusted return for us as an investor. And that's a really difficult balance to get right. And it's one where we really see some fintechs are really able to leverage all of these great things that we've talked about on the panel today to create that balance and create sustainable and scalable lending models.
Before we close out and open the questions to the audience, the Q&A session, I would like to ask you guys if you had a wish to accelerate the potential of fintechs, rescue more areas, right? What would that wish be? I'll start with you, Gillian.
I would love to see that the government and the policy is closer tied to the regulation that's opened up by sandboxes. I think that case studies driving business cases, driving real impact on value would be amazing to see over the next number of years. I think, honestly, if we could do it in the space where you've non-performing debt, we wouldn't have the situations, like we'll still always have like insolvency follows consumerism, right? But actually getting this right and that the regulation stacks up behind use cases in our current culture and environment, I think would be an immense leap forward for us.
Fantastic. Alison, what was your wish?
I think Gillian's hit the nail on the head. The right fit for purpose regulation is just so key, not only to allow businesses to get on with the job at hand, but do it safely, and to give institutional investors like ourselves the confidence to put the money down to back them.
This has been great, guys. Now let's take some audience questions. That was a great session. Guys, plenty of questions here coming from the audience. Let's kickstart us with the first one. How is fintech enabling access to inclusiveness, right, and financial services? Gillian, maybe you can kickstart us with.
For sure, I guess in our, specifically in the debt and the debt advice and insolvency space, it's been really interesting because vulnerability is a question that is talked about an awful lot, but it's quite hard to pick up on. And with the time and the constraints, the big priority is always about getting the right arrangement or the solution for the consumer. And sometimes these things can be dropped. So a lot of tech, I mean, even ourselves, we've built in natural language processing. So when someone is writing why they go insolvent, we look for literacy levels, language issues, making sure that they can actually understand what they're signing up to. And then a big thing as well is looking at, when we're analysing, for instance, the transactions, we look to see, is there anything unusual that would indicate vulnerability outside of this? I think though in the longer term, some of the voice recognition technology is incredible. That's coming to the forefront, and application of that into the financial services to enable to basically understand appetite, risk, and those abilities. I think the AI behind it's phenomenal.
Alison, want to chip in?
Yeah, I think it's a really good, really topical question. And I think what Gillian was saying about vulnerability will be all the more relevant when we start to see the end of furlough schemes and government-backed lending schemes. I think there's still quite a big question mark over how collections processes will be run for those government-backed schemes, and treating those SMEs in a fair way is going to be a big topic of discussion. We've been seeing some interesting lending models that look to address this question of sustainable but affordable access to finance for people who might be in more vulnerable states, or have a thin credit file and therefore can't easily access affordable sources of financing, regardless of what their income and expenditure is. So I think open banking unlocks a huge amount of that analysis that can be overlaid on the traditional credit scoring and affordability assessment. So I think there's a lot of promising things to come, and fintech certainly seems to be driving that forward faster than the incumbents.
I really like the next one. This one, I'm really looking forward to hear what you guys found out in 2020. What fintech did you learn about first time in 2020 that excited you, and why? Alison?
I'm going to slightly cop out on this one, because I think what I saw more broadly is a really impressive industry response to the pandemic, a very quick pivoting of models, shift of focus, shift in underwriting approach, shift in the way that customers were contacted about forbearance, all in a very quick and efficient way. So I think the industry response to the pandemic has been something that has really impressed me this year.
Jill, you're not allowed to say Cerebrum, right?
No, definitely not. But how can I actually say anybody else? Because so many of them are friends, peers that have started companies, and anybody who's super in our space we've integrated with. So I definitely completely agree with Alison. It's been such an amazing couple of months. When you're looking at a negative in general, to take some positivity out of it has been the industry's response. For me, though, the biggest area that I think is so interesting at the minute is the unregulated credit. So the buy now, pay later. These have sprung up in the UK. Irish consumers are seeing it obviously on all the websites. PayPal came out with PayPal Credit, but it is unregulated credit. And I think that's going to massively impact the lending market over the next year. So anybody coming in with tech for this, I think the companies themselves are amazing, but monitoring and how do you actually bring this in line with regulation is going to be extremely interesting.
That was very political.
Yeah, will be an interesting topic. There's a scandal in the offing, I'm sure.
Yeah.
That was a very political answer by both of you, keeping all parties happy, right? I think this one must have came in from a fintech. So is there a future where fintech becomes the high street bank, right? And the current banks close down, right? There are no alternatives.
I think it's a potential for sure. I mean, when you look at tier 1 and tier 2 banks, they're operating across so many different verticals that they're involved in. And it's very hard to compete with the new challenger banks that are coming online, who are just core about the consumer. They're about delivering really good retail solutions. And because they're smaller, it's much easier to turn them and, act dynamically than an oil tanker, which are what the big banks basically are. So it's very much an opportunity. I think if COVID has shown us anything, it's that retail spaces, I don't know if there's ever going to be high street banks physically again, but you can definitely see, particularly in the younger generation drive, when we're assessing the insolvency arrangement, they will have more of the challenger banks than somebody, for instance, who's my age and older, who still bank with their original, whoever they, put their communion money into, first of all, in real Catholic Ireland. So there's definitely a huge change, I think, coming, and it's because of their ability to niche. But in terms of actual property, I'm not 100% sure will they ever come back into the small towns and villages, because it's such a huge expense, and the challenger banks are very dynamic and agile. So I don't really know why they would spend the money.
Alison, would you be around for the next year?
I have a slightly different view on it. I think Gillian has a really good insight on the physical presence of the incumbent banks. I think what we'll see at the moment, we're seeing fintech driving innovation at a far faster pace than the incumbents. And I think there will become a split where there will be those incumbents who embrace change and can put in the capex to make that change effective, and there will be those who get left behind, and ultimately it will be survival of the fittest. And I'm very sure that many of the incumbents have the right people, the right models to make digitization of their own models a great success. And maybe in the future we will see there being much more of a blurred line between fintechs and incumbents, and more of a merging of new powers within financial services, and that will naturally mean that some will be left behind. And it won't just be the incumbents that don't modernize that get left behind, but also the challengers who can't put together a scalable and sustainable business model.
I think as well, you're absolutely right, Alison. There's also, though, a huge drive, like everything is completely personalized to you as a consumer now at the moment, and the world is just moving in that direction. And so what it will come down to is which provider is going to give you the best option for exactly what you need. And those financial products are going to become more and more hyper personalized. Yeah. And so those that can do it will drive, they will have their own market, they will look for more niches. And I think, you're right, the giants that we have, they are amazing, and there's a huge amount of trust, and there's liquidity, and particularly with certain generations and aptitudes and attitudes towards money and where they lend from. People are very, and particularly in Ireland, people trust who their parents used to trust, and we have a very different lending profile to the UK. So it'll be really, really interesting to see as the products start to personalize, is that going to be specific to a specific institute, and do they actually end up with market share for very certain niches?
Yeah, I agree. And what we haven't talked about is the big tech companies coming into the space as well. Yes. So there's that angle as well. Google Bank and Apple Bank coming into play.
100%. I think the big tech might be the biggest threat over the next 2 years. Even if we look at stats, number 5, all around the world, the top 5 banks have 2/3 of the market. So disappearing overnight, it will be a challenge. I would say even over the next 5 years. But let's take one more, right, guys, and we park it here. So the last one here is interested in companies in Ireland who are willing to participate in developing an SSI digital wallet solution for Irish citizens. There's an interesting one here because there's a project already kickstarted in Ireland around this space. But Gillian, what do you think about this?
I think so. Prior to starting this company, my whole background in data has always been about trying to create a unique person. And most of my work involved cleaning so much dirty data to try and figure out who exactly is who. And I think sometimes without DNA, I don't know if it's possible. I think the Irish market offers a lot more of a challenge, even though we're a smaller population. I look at where we are in rural part of Donegal, and I will tell you that there is no shortages of John or Joseph Dohertys in the whole county, and they all have the same address. So we're that, you know, without the bank themselves and the person working in the bank knowing who they are and the postman, it's actually very difficult to create a unique identity for people, because postcodes are only a very recent thing, or air codes. I think that's definitely going to help. It is, look, it's an amazing technology. I think so many things would work an awful lot better if we did have identity as a fundamental, because you're always scrabbling as a data scientist to create it. So yeah, it's a really, really interesting space.
Alison, what do you think?
I think Gillian's the expert on this one. Definitely happy to defer to her better knowledge. Well done.
I think Asia had a very interesting development now, you know, with their vision technology. They're pairing a lot of biometrics as well coming into it. So you never know, in Ireland, we might be able to get there someday, right?
But it opens up huge challenges around, you know, like GDPR was brought in and it only started to scratch the surface. There's a huge part about ethics and data and ethics that's sitting behind this. And I think, you know, it depends on what it's used for. Ultimately, all our legislation is about what do you intend to do with the data. And when you are giving your, you know, consent for it to be used, what you expect it to be used for and your understanding of that. I don't know, I think the education systems will be changing to actually introduce this as a concept fairly rapidly, because it is just becoming so much more a part of our day-to-day lives. And it is up to us, you know, to educate the younger generation coming through about what it means, so that the right ethics can be put in place behind it.
That was absolutely fantastic, guys. So we hit the two words that sometimes we don't want to get to, you know, GDPR and Brexit. So with that, I'll leave you here. That was great, guys. I'll pass it over to Aoife.
Thank you, Jesus, Gillian and Alison. That was so interesting and insightful in terms of what the fintech landscape in Ireland and wider actually looks like right now. And for me, I was actually really heartened to hear that the democratization of finance and the protection of the vulnerable is actually so core to the purpose and the ambitions of the fintech industry at the moment. So that was actually a fantastic learning and great to hear. Very interesting commentary on Ireland. And I guess the pros and cons, right? That dreaded B word, Brexit, presents potentially opportunity for Ireland. But to Gillian's point, you know, there seems to be a lot more to do with the regulator to open up Ireland as a place that fintechs can kind of thrive and bring the right solutions to customers. So lots of very interesting points there, and really appreciate your points of view. The day is going so fast, I can't believe it. We're already getting into kind of partway through our afternoon session, so I think time flies when you're having fun. But we do have another discussion here in stream one that's going to be very interesting, and actually maybe almost a follow-on from this discussion around fintech more broadly. We're going to have a great discussion about the future of payments specifically, led by Grace Hayes from MasterCard, and really looking forward to that. You can, of course, switch to stream 2 if you'd like. And in stream 2 next, we're having a discussion around diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives that you actually can drive in your organization. And, you know, it's going to give, you know, great insight into some of the examples around D&I initiatives that are underway in Ireland and beyond. So very much looking forward to that session as well. If you would like to move to stream 2, you're welcome to go ahead and do that right now by clicking the stream 2 button underneath the screen. But for those of us who are staying here in stream 1, firstly, I'd like to remind you of the social tags that we have. So it's hashtag WIFSummit. Get out there, get your commentary going, and let's see if we can get trending. Again, the Q&A and the interaction has been fantastic all day, so I don't think I need to remind you again to keep the questions coming, but I will, so please do so. And now, as I said, we're going to go into our next session, which talks about the future of payments. And really, I suppose, there's a couple of key questions that not only do we talk about in professional kind of circles, but also at home around the dinner table. And some of those kind of conversation topics are really, you know, what has the pandemic done in the shift towards digital wallet? What really are the organization impacts of making payments digital? And we did kind of touch on that actually in the conversation just now. You know, for different generations, they interact with financial institutions in many different ways. And as we move to a more digital world, you know, how does that impact different sectors of society? And with that, what are the risks and challenges from a societal perspective around this move to digital payments? And, you know, with that, how do we make it more accessible and more user-friendly? So very much looking forward to the presentation from Grace, who is an SVP in MasterCard Europe. So no better individual to actually give us the inside track on some of these thoughts. So I'll hand over to you now, Grace. You're very welcome.
Thank you, Aoife, for the introduction. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to speak at today's session. On the topic of payments in the future, it's really no one really knows. And if I'd been asked the same question or to present at this time last year, I could never have predicted the year that we've just all lived through. So I think what we're going to focus on today is just some of the insights that we have, maybe to, you know, look at future trends, look at some of the predictions that we can make, and hopefully just spark a little bit of curiosity that you can indulge yourselves to look into your own businesses and really understand what the future of payments will be for you in your business and your community. So with that, just going to look at some of the future trends. Many of you may have heard the story of innovation, particularly I think it was focused around Henry Ford. And it was where everyone was trying to breed a faster horse, and then the invention of a car completely disrupted that. So our ways of thinking and predicting trends can often be a little bit different from what you would expect to see. When we break down today's trends, it's really around trying to understand where things can be broadly grouped together. So when we look at consumers, all right, consumers that consume products and services, or enterprises that provide those services, and the macroeconomic changes that shift the ground that those two operate on. This last bucket here in particular focus on the economy-wide shifts, but also changing government attitudes towards digital policy. Technology gets better and the bar gets raised. Our new demands as consumers can be boiled down to just 3 areas: choice, convenience, and control. Because we know what's out there, we want to be given the freedom to choose how and what we buy, but also we want it to be made easy. And lastly, we want to control who sees what we're doing. Consumers are owning more devices than ever and expect technology and services to be at their fingertips at all times. We're always reachable by our phones. We track our health by our smartwatches and talk to our TVs. Interconnectivity is going to pick up and is definitely going to be the way forward. Ownership aversion is really a trend that's really growing. Ownership and flexibility of lifestyles has given rise to a subscription model. People don't want to commit to buying anything, but they still want the benefits of ownership without any of the major costs involved. When we look at emerging economies, this is going to be a really big driving force in the years to come. Economies that have global population growth. Almost 97% of the population will increase in the next 10 years and will actually come from emerging economies, especially China, India, and Pakistan. As they become a larger share of the pie, they will attract increased attention as a consumer segment, as well as a larger focus on the innovations that work in those economies, like mobile money. Niche consumer groups will also emerge. For an example, as a direct result of the increasing global life expectancy, the elderly, disabled, permanently ill populations will also increase by 500 billion by 2030 by UN estimates. These populations require specific solutions that address their unique needs. Why are we seeing on-demand emerge? Businesses are seeking out lower cost but faster ways to scale resources for the fast-moving digital world that we live in. A lot have resorted to going on demand, allowing them to scale from 10 to 10,000 in days or weeks versus what would have taken them months or years. In effect, the subscription economy is being driven by consumer and business demand, but it's also blurring the lines between consumers and small businesses and how we define a consumer going forward. Platforms are certainly winning in e-commerce. Some of the major e-commerce platforms are really starting to explode. They're to double over the next 5 years. High growth markets like Asia and Europe and North America are really being driven by platforms with a growing demand for one-stop shopping experiences. Alibaba, as an example, has now over 58% of Chinese e-commerce, and Amazon has up to 50% in the US, with a growing claim that they're almost at #1 in Europe. Digital and physical are blending. I think everyone is beginning to see that, particularly this year. We're looking at really resetting our expectations in the physical world. Those are being reset and made possible by what we're experiencing in digital. As such, we're going to see more of a blurring of the physical and digital experiences in order to meet those new customer demands and needs. Open banking is one of the new ways in which consumers will access banking in a different way from they are today. Open banking will completely change the status quo. Over the last 10 years, we've seen everyday banking fundamentally transformed, with online and mobile channels now becoming the norm. Drivers of how the government work and act in this, and the trends that we can see coming towards that, is very much around protecting our privacy. You know, there are only a few years ago, I think it was 2018, when we've seen GDPR really come to life across Ireland and Europe. Looking at nationalism, it's really growing in intensity, with 35 countries exhibiting some form of nationalism threat as today. On-soil switching or on-soil data regulations are now becoming commonplace. Also looking at emerging markets again, but really those that are going to leapfrog traditional payments. So looking at the relevancy of unbanked or underbanked populations, 2 billion individuals and over 200 million small businesses today lack access to formal banking. However, there are over 100 million active money mobile accounts in Africa and 40 million in South Asia, growing at 30% annually, leapfrogging the normal traditional payment platforms. Looking at technology, you're either ahead of the game or you're not. And I think one of the areas that we really start focusing on then is, how do we get ahead of the curve? What are our emerging technologies? Some of these, whether it's currently mature or 10 years plus, most of these are now commonplace in our language. So when we look at things like biometrics, they're now part of our everyday banking experience, for example. Or if we jump forward to something like quantum computing, it may seem like quite a futuristic idea, but maybe it's not. Cloud and edge computing are really powering extremely smart, fast devices, most of which fit in our hand. Cloud was 182 billion 2 years ago, and it's projected to grow at 16%. By 2022, just next year, we're going to see this grow to almost over 330 billion by the end of 22. When we look at autonomous vehicles, so anyone who's in the motor industry or a car enthusiast, we have another few steps to go before we get full autonomy, we'll say to get to level 5. And that's where you don't actually need any human interference in order to drive the vehicle. What is the real impact of that when we're talking about payments? So things like machine-to-machine payments enabled means, what will that driver experience be? What will the surrounding customer service roles be that currently supported today? Internet of Things. Essentially, it entails the full range of things that can be connected to the internet. The jury is still out when we talk about whether this is consumer or business that will drive new Internet of Things innovations and the economic impact that will have. But ultimately, we are looking at the cost per device is very low, so the entry is quite low, and therefore you're then looking at, well, what kind of opportunity would that have when it comes to things like identification devices? 5G, very topical, particularly in Ireland at the moment. It will deliver significantly faster connectivity, which will then enable a lot of this. At the moment, 5G is being recognised as being 10 times faster than our existing 4G services, and not all of Ireland even has 4G at the moment. So there's a long way to go, but it's certainly something that is going to really expedite and accelerate many of these new technology sets for us. AI and machine learning. As of today, there's quite a bit of this that may not even be recognized as AI or machine learning. So think about things that have now, your experiences that have become very personalized, all right? One example could be Amazon's product recommendations. It generates up to 20% of additional sales from AI-powered recommendations and suggestions. Also, when we look at things like intelligent assistants, it might be quite futuristic yet. However, as of 2017, this was in existence. The market was actually worth over 2 billion. And by 2025, it's going to be worth closer to 20 billion. This is a growing market. This is where intelligent assistants can make a multitude of forms, from sophisticated voice embedded devices such as Alexa, some of you may have it in your home, to really looking at how chatbots could be leveraged by merchants or banks today. By 2021, approximately 1.8 billion people will be taking advantage from voice search technology. These technologies have emerged from personal use to finding their ways now into our workplaces. Today, AR is definitely laying the foundation for a lot of this. By 2025, the addressable market for AR software is widely predicted to explode to top 85 billion. There's a huge opportunity. Computer vision. When we think about computer vision, it's the concept of using a network of cameras and images to enable actions and items to be detected by a program or by a computer. Computer vision has been used already today in some industries. So things like in commerce, for example, Amazon launched their Amazon Go store in 2018, making computer vision to track which products customers were selecting. And even though humans are still involved, it's largely automated now. In 2018, Amazon announced plans to create more than 3,000 stores by 2021. Next up, cryptocurrency. And I think this has become very relevant in Ireland because we're seeing a lot of the large American companies investing in this as well. But really, from our perspective, when we look at this and the implications directly on our payments industry, what do we look at? We're looking at financial institutions. They're really beginning to explore more actively the use of crypto and the applications like blockchain. Okay, cryptocurrency definitely have mixed successes, but some of the really strong emergence that are coming out of this are going to really transform how we do it. There's a lot of opportunities with cryptocurrency, but equally, I believe at this moment in time, there's still a lot of concerns and consideration that needs to be taken. When we look at effective computing, this uses human interaction inputs to determine an individual's mood. Is it that far in the future? Potentially not. We can use facial expressions, voice recognition, skin temperature, or even heart rates. Think about the impact this would have during this current global pandemic. Potential use cases could include things like effective inputs to assist individuals with communication or emotive regulation challenges with people maybe that have special needs. Cognification is the confluence of two different technologies, but chiefly it is bringing together artificial intelligence and Internet of Things. As of today, cognification is limited in scope. There's only certain devices becoming smart or connected. And really, the maturation of sensors means that anything can generate data. But what will that mean? It requires edge and cloud computing to manage the continuous tailoring to the algorithms that make up that user. There's a lot of barriers for this becoming scalable at this moment in time. Some of them is data, really understanding that many of the large payment players really lack the rich contextual data that's required for a really strong top performing AI. Quantum computing, again, like I said earlier, it may seem quite futuristic, but really it may not be as far out as what we predict. This is based on quantum physics that offers fundamentally a different way to perform calculations than in classical computing. Current quantum computers are very much at the research stage, but have seen heavy investment by Google, IBM, and others. Recently, Google actually claimed that they had reached quantum supremacy back in the end of October in 2019. However, it has been disputed by rivals like IBM. When we start looking at predictions, it's really all that is. This is no way something that anyone can really do with any great degree of accuracy. And even the great Bill Gates, I think this statement really rings through, because the short term is often more difficult than the long term, because the long term tends to exceed our expectations. Predictions, what I've tried to do is group them into three main categories: our interfaces, our business models, and our payment types. We've broken them down into 12 key learnings or predictions. First of all, voice. Like I mentioned earlier, this is going to really have a significant trend upwards in the coming years. Intelligence assistant sales has significantly grown. Voice assistance in use today is also due to increase 4 times fold in the next 5 years. When we start looking at growth projections, when it comes to frictionless payments, 74% of Canadian and British consumers consider contactless so convenient that they no longer feel the need to carry cash. When you think about worldwide, over 1 billion people lack access to a legal way to identify themselves. Smartphone prices have fallen in most emerging economies, but that enables us a way to be able to store digital ID information. When we look at the access that will then allow to financial services, it could provide access for up to 1.7 billion individuals. An example that I was given was $1 billion was saved on civil service staff in Nigeria by using digital IDs. It actually removed over 60,000 ghost workers. Then when we talk about platforms, some of the examples that I could give, maybe like the current size, Alibaba as an example. Then when we start talking about open banking again, which is definitely going to be one of our major trends to watch from a payments perspective, 1/3 of UK adults are expected to participate in open banking by 2022. 71% of UK SMEs are expected to adopt it by 2022. Financial open APIs increased from 116 in 2009 to 2,300 in 2017. Globally, we have 160 million gig workers, and it's growing approximately 12% on year. 69% of US freelancers said perceptions of freelancing as a career are improving, and many are doing it by choice, not necessity. When we then start thinking about, subscription and on demand, the number of adults in developed economies that have subscriptions rose from 53% in 2014 to over 70% in 2019. 74% of consumers in developed markets believe that people will subscribe to more services and own less physical goods in the future. Proven success in Asia and in Africa, whether it's through M-Pesa or others, validate that mobile is a viable path to financial inclusion in most of our growing economies. Our B2B segments is really accelerating. The surge of fintechs and startups focus on tackling B2B pain points. Startup disruptors are really making digital B2B payments simpler by leveraging APIs, by looking at some of those emerging technologies like AI. Then we talk about P2P growth. Think about this. Have we seen it? Have we seen it in our day-to-day lives? What has that adoption and usage encouraged? And then looking at alternative financing options. Consumer trends are changing and they're really shaping this. The high estimate, and this is actually from Accenture, is that our market size is approximately 1.2 trillion. Then when we think about alternative lenders, 73% of consumers, they're more likely to spend online if offered instant financing than they would have if they were in a store. And then finally, what are the viable digital currency schemes that we should be looking at? Some of them that certainly have gained a lot of traction recently is the likes of Libra or Ripple. The next step that we all need to do is really consider what this means for our business, our future products, how we position ourselves and our services. And then you, as an individual, as a consumer, how will that shape the payments of the future? Thank you, everyone.
Great. Thank you so much for that amazing presentation. I feel like I've been on a bit of a magical mystery tour of payments over the last few minutes.
No problem.
Some of the stats towards the end there are really, really mind-blowing, and the Q&A box is kind of hopping actually. So it's obviously engendering a great response from the participants as well. We might jump straight into questions, Grace, if that's okay.
Absolutely. Yeah, sure.
Super. So kind of start strong with quite a statement and question from one of our participants. Grace, will money disappear?
I wish I knew. I guess is the right answer. I think what we're seeing is, when we were younger, cash was king, and I think across the world it was known as probably the most appropriate way to buy things, and that has significantly shifted in the last 10, 15, 20 years. If we expect to see the same shifts in another 10, 15, 20 years again, then it could well be gone. We are seeing a lot of different societies and countries really moving towards completely digitalized payments. Or in some cases, just looking at what their paper currency is and the denominations and trying to remove it almost on a phased basis. But ultimately, I think to determine whether cash is going to go or not, it comes down to three things. And if you think about yourself and your own wallet and what you think about, it comes down to easy use. Cash is there, you know what you have, you pay it over the counter, job done. So we have to make that user experience completely seamless, really easy. The next thing is, I don't know anyone from their college days, the fear of, will the card be declined? That kind of way, will I have enough money? Will there be an embarrassment factor even there? So really thinking around, the reliability of the digital networks. Are they there for me? Am I going to be able to process this payment as easily as I could otherwise? And I guess the last thing then is security. Everyone, particularly depending on your generation, certainly my generation and a bit older, sometimes are a little bit more cautious around putting their money somewhere that maybe isn't a traditional bank or somewhere that's, we'll say, a card on file or something. What's the security elements around that? And really thinking quite deeply around, do I trust this provider that's going to make sure that this works for me in my time of need? So I think when you think about those, and also some of the disruption factors that we can see, whether it's cryptocurrency or mobile banking or whatever it is coming in, then there probably is quite a strong use case to say cash may not be dead, but it may be on the way out.
Interesting. And you actually picked up there, Grace, on some of the generational dimensions of these lenses that you're speaking of. What are the other kind of societal risks and challenges you see with moving to this kind of cashless world?
With cashless in particular, some of the areas that I touched on already, it's very, very much around how invested the government are as well. Is this something that's going to be run and approached and really embraced by the location that you live in, regardless of your generation? I think that's one thing. We've seen some shifts, we'll say, in India and some other countries in our Nordic regions or whatever, whereby it's fully embraced. There's digital ID programs, there's digital banking, there's very little barrier for entry for disruptors to come into those marketplaces. And I think in those areas where you have that strong foundation and infrastructure in place for it to succeed, I think it will do very well. Yeah.
Super. Okay, I'll hop to another question in the box. In relation to intelligent assistance, where do you see that going in the future?
This is one of what we're calling our bubbles of kind of future, but the reality is it's out there. We have to a certain extent, maybe you could call it phase one or whatever of this already in place. The most common type of intelligent assistant is going to be through voice. That's what we're predicting at the moment. And some of you may already have things like Alexa or whatever in your home, or are very familiar with, voice type assistants. But really, if we fast forward that by a couple of years, what does that really mean in terms of payments and what that would mean to us? So you can look at things like, we'll say, intelligent assistants going out. They can do everything from your basic grocery shopping to choosing what type of music you listen to choosing what type of car you buy, etc., etc. And really, the biggest disruptor there is going to be around our brand loyalty. If you think about it, if you've got a bot or an intelligent assistant of some kind making these choices for you, where does the consumer sit in that? And where is the brand loyalty? And I guess the experience going to be, and how will that evolve? So I think it's very interesting how this is going to change. And certainly one of the things that MasterCard were considering a couple of years ago is our brand is obviously very important, the exact same as every other company. It's one of our key. And we decided that we'd start looking into sonic branding, because if our brand is being used by the likes of intelligent assistants, chatbots, whatever it is, we don't want our brand to weaken. So there's alternative ways of making sure that you have that. It can be visual recognition through a logo, icon, whatever. It can be sonic through sound. And really, just as a company, whatever company you work with, you really need to consider how you'll be able to retain that brand if we start relying quite heavily on consumer experiences becoming much more digital.
Interesting. Yeah, sonic branding is fascinating. You're seeing it more and more, that it'll, for example,
Absolutely.
when you switch on your Netflix, the little tut at the start, you immediately associate with Netflix now. So it's becoming more and more part of our kind of daily experience, right? So
it's huge in Ireland, and I think particularly some Irish brands were very iconic, through television advertisement. You didn't even have to be in the same room, but you could hear the theme tune or whatever it was, and straight away you associate. I'm going way back, but things like the soaps, like Coronation Street, whatever, what those entries are. So there is that immediate relationship with the brand there, and that's ultimately what you're trying to do, but in a space where that human kind of touch is almost lost. So how do you replace that?
Fascinating. So this is a topic we could unpick and unpack for hours, but actually we've run out of time, as we always do in these fascinating chats. So thank you so much, Grace, for your thoughts on payments. For me, I think what has struck me is the breadth and depth of the industry, how many things are going on, the amount of different players and different scenarios that may play out over the next couple of years is fascinating. So it's a little bit of a case of holding on to our hats, so to speak.
Absolutely.
So thank you very, very much, Grace. Really appreciate that. So we've got something very, very exciting next that I'm really, really, really looking forward to. And that is my co-host, Breda McKay, who is taking off her hosting hat and putting on her presenting hat, moving into her presentation room in her house, and going to give us some of her thoughts on tackling 2021 with a fresh mindset. And as she calls it, glowing up in lockdown. So really looking forward to hearing from Breda in a few minutes. In the meantime, I just want to remind everybody of the social tag, hashtag WIFSummit. Let's get out there and kind of sharing our thoughts and sharing some of the ideas that we've been talking about today. For all of you who are here right now, you can stay where you are for the next piece, and we're actually having our stream 2 cohorts and colleagues come back in and join us. So if I was to talk a little bit about what's going to happen next, we're going to actually end, but I think with a little bit of what I call motivation, because for those of you who've been experiencing Breda's hosting skills as we go through today, she certainly inspires and motivates. And together during this session, she's going to talk to us a little bit about how we shouldn't actually underestimate our power and our ability to adapt and grow in these kind of crazy times, and looking into 2021, to be aware of our own mindset and checking ourselves, and also actually taking this opportunity to evaluate what we want and how we achieve our own individual balance, which of course is different for absolutely everybody. And the other piece is, actually being mindful and conscious of others. Many individuals in this room in this virtual room and attending this conference have, are at a good place in their careers, they've progressed, but actually, how do you think about sending the elevator down and ensuring that you support your teams and your colleagues in what is also a very trying time for them? If I go back to the very, very start of the day and the fireside chat that we had this morning, Susie spoke about actually looking after ourselves as the first step in being able to look after others. And really that's all about what Breeda's going to talk to us about right now. So looking forward to seeing Breeda in host mode. And I'm going to hand over to Breeda now.
Thanks a million. So you're very welcome to my session today. I'm Breeda McKeag, and I've written this session for all our participants today, and I've called it Glowing Up in Lockdown, because I think we have a lot of opportunity in lockdown, and I want us to look differently at lockdowns. So in case you've just joined me, a little bit about me. I've got a military background. I run Lean In Ireland. I do motivational talks. I work in IT change management in financial institutions. I'm a mum and I commute roughly about 4 hours a day usually. So lockdown suits me. Right, so we're going to have a look at growth in recessions, because I want us to frame this differently. Your mindset is everything, and the lens that you look at your life through is everything. So all of your outcomes are reliant on your mindset and the lens by which you're looking at life. So recessions are the perfect time for change and growth. And we're going to have a look at some companies and individuals who have proved that to us. And the reason I want to do that is I want us to ask ourselves, why are we not doing something like that? So rather than thinking about how awful lockdowns are, I want us thinking differently. And it's about challenging your thinking today. Here's some companies that were born in recessions, and I'm sure you've probably used some of them. Maybe you still do. Microsoft, I'm on a Microsoft device to you today. Airbnbs, we're all using those. Burger King, I use a lot, and there are others there that you can have a look at, IBM and so forth, and Disney, which we'll have a wee look at as well in more detail. So what have they got that you do not? And that's what I want you asking yourself. First one up there is Vera Wang. She is now 70, but at the age of 40, when she designed her own wedding dress, she decided to start her own fashion label. Now, how many of us realize that she started that so late in life? And she just started that because she was designing her own wedding dress. And now look at the empire she has built. So then there's another one I pick for you is Denise Coates. I'm fascinated by this lady's story. She was in finance and she then decided to set up her own online gambling company, and now is worth obviously a lot of billion there. She just got a bank loan to start her business. Who of us here today would have thought of doing something like that? So it's just again to show you how other people are thinking and how other people are using time to think, less of a commute, to their advantage. I love this one. Who's this fella? Walt Disney. So Walt Disney decided to turn a mouse into something that everybody would associate happiness with. He built a whole brand around it, and we all go to see this mouse and all of the production around it every year. He has turned a mouse into that. Now, why can't you turn your ideas or your products or your belief into something as strong as that? If he can do it with a mouse, you can do it with you. Find new ways is my mantra for lockdowns, because I think the ways you probably used to find to help yourself career-wise and visibility are maybe not there. So everything that I have ran into this year, I have decided to find new ways around it. So obstacles, they will appear in lockdown just as they do outside of lockdown. And I want you to be thinking about how you can find new ways around them. So growing your career in lockdown. So stronger communication skills, absolutely have to happen. I started working remotely about 12 years ago, and I remember realizing to myself in the house working from home that I would have to really up the ante on my communication skills and my online visibility, because how else is anybody going to know what you are doing and the skills you have, or the strengths you have, or the expertise that they could be using? So think about that and figure out how you can do that for yourself. Staying in the forefront of people's minds is easy to do because you've got loads of online channels to use. But are you using them is the question. And if you're not using them, why are you not using them? What excuses are you telling yourself? Is it that you are worried about what people will think if you go online? Or just figure out what it is you're telling yourself. so that you can then start to silence that negativity and get over it. So a bit of advice for you is to consider what the CEOs, the COOs, the CFOs, and the CPOs, and all the communities and societies around you really need at this time, and trying to provide some of that by way of service or by way of advice or by way of info sharing, simply. So I don't know if any of you are doing that, and if you're not, I want you thinking about that and how can you start to do some of that. The beliefs behind your decision making. You have a subconscious mind and you have a conscious mind, and most of the decisions that you make are being driven by what's in that subconscious mind. Your conditioning is impacting all of your decision making, and your conditioning is kind of like the programming that has gone into that subconscious mind from you were a kid. So the environment you grew up in, all of the adults that were around you, their voices have been programmed into your subconscious mind. So their decision making is now your decision making, unless you go and you treat that and you learn how to replace that. The other thing to be conscious of rather than wary is, who are your 5 influencers? Because you become the average of the 5 people that you spend your headspace with. And what most people don't realize these days is you are seeing a lot of people online. You're absorbing all of that every time you turn on the radio, watch the TV, listen to the news, every time you have a conversation with someone. All of that is impacting and building on that subconscious mind and all of that programming. So you need to get very choosy who you are spending time with, who you're having conversations with, who you are following, whose feed are you absorbing? Because I can guarantee you, when you're following and your feed and your environment is full of healthy minds, productive and growth, that's what you'll become. That's how you train your mind. Mythbuster. I wrote this because I think these slogans are things that if you don't test your own thinking on them, then they will very easily keep you stuck. Self-praise is no praise. I used to hear that all the time as a kid, and I can tell you now that the line needs to go through that. So put that one into the bin. Self-praise is the only praise that will actually impact your life. It's the only show in town. So what you think of you and how you praise yourself and how you coach yourself is everything, and it will have every impact on your life. I can't do anything about it is what people tell me when they're in lockdown. And that drives me nuts, because yes, you can. You just need to find new ways. So if you're telling yourself you can't do anything about something, I want you testing your thinking on that. Because I would say I would find a way around it. I'm too late, too old, too young, too skinny, too fat, too tall, and too small. I am hearing this all the time from people I coach. And we are the best at finding reasons not to do things. And I can tell you all of that needs to be put in the bin as well. Put a line through all of that. You are what you believe you are. And if you believe that you deserve the best and you give yourself good visions, good goals, and good dreams to work towards, whether you're fat, small, ugly, whatever it is, you're telling yourself, that is totally irrelevant. Totally irrelevant. Another line I do hear a lot is, I wouldn't be capable of that role. So people freak out at the thoughts of going for a very senior role or a promotion. And I've seen every one of them flourish that got coaching and put themselves into that role, because you learn as you go. So stop doubting yourself. Then I hear I couldn't commit the hours for that role. And that makes me laugh, because I think those people who are telling themselves that are usually working long hours, and they think that if they go for a more senior role that it would be a lot worse. Can't get much worse. I used to do that to myself many years ago, and I was already working around the clock. And actually it gets better, because the more senior you go, the more you can manage your diary and your schedule and your commitments yourself. And then I'm often told I could never ask for that much pay. I'm like, oh my God, you need to believe that you deserve it. You're probably contributing so much to your companies and your organizations. They're getting more back from you than you're thinking about. So stop thinking about what you can't do and think about what you can do. The only thing that can stop you is fear. Fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of change, the fear of the unknown, and the fear of success, which is a weird one, but I have seen that in action. I've seen so much self-sabotage, it's shocking. Your decisions and journeys so far, I want you thinking about, where did fear feature in some of your decisions, and be honest with yourself. If you hadn't been afraid, what would you have done? Flight or fight principles, you are not in a cave anymore and no one is going to eat you. So fear is no longer going to help you in your life. You ain't in that cave anymore. All that I see fear doing is people get stuck under a blanket of fear. They've got loads of dreams and ambitions, and then the fear blanket comes in and they stop there. And I want you to all get through that. That's just an obstacle for you to teach yourself and understand a bit about and get around that and start testing those fears and absolutely busting them. Feel the fear and do it anyway. I'm sure you've heard it all, but that is exactly what you need to do. And then lastly, the lack of self-care and not celebrating your small wins. If you're not looking after yourself and you're not celebrating even the small wins you get on a day-to-day basis, then your fears plus those two other things will really keep you stuck. So there's 3 sort of success criteria for you. Get over your fears, celebrate your small wins, and take care of yourself. Are you actually aiming for awesome, or are you trying to hit average? Because I think a lot of us think we are aiming for awesome, but have you actually thought about what that means? What is the most awesome thing you've seen in the world, on the globe, in the planet? Because that's what's awesome. Most of us end up going for what we see around us. And again, that's more of your conditioning. And normally that's fairly average. An average isn't exciting. An average is a difficult journey. Living month to month isn't easy nor pleasant. Okay? Abundance, an abundant mindset is something that is there for every one of us, yet you're conditioned not to think about abundance in a healthy way. There's a massive piece there that every one of you need to research and have a look at. So do you have a current vision board? And I want you all to vote on this for me, because I'm very interested in how many of us think we have goals, but yet we haven't done a vision board. You have not given your mind pictures or words. So therefore, your visions are fleeting thoughts, and fleeting thoughts won't stick. They don't land, because every dream is still a dream until it becomes a plan, when it gets written down and broken down into little steps. So if you don't have a vision board, then your fleeting thoughts will come back and haunt you over and over again because you haven't made progress on them. So get a vision board. Every one of you need a vision board. And do your mind a favor, give it the direction and the compass that it actually needs. It'll do all the rest of the work for you. This is one of my favorite quotes. Shoot for the moon. Even if you miss, you land amongst the stars. And I want every one of you watching this to think hard about that. Are you actually aiming for that moon? Is there anything better than what you're aiming for? Do you think you're pushing yourself hard enough? Are you challenging yourself hard enough on the goals and the dreams that you have for yourself? Because most people that I coach are not. And that's where the likes of a coach or a motivator comes in, to push you out of that average sort of default thinking out into where it's not a comfort zone, but you're being challenged, you're growing and you're stretching and you're achieving. And that's where everybody needs to be, because that is where you are at your best. I can guarantee you that. Average is easy. It's awesome that takes practice. So average is what you will become if you do not put an effort into your self-mastery or your mind mastery or understanding your conditioning or reconditioning your beliefs. Then you will end up with average. So awesome takes all of the work that I've just talked about. It takes work on fear. It takes work on your goals, your dreams. You need a vision board. You need to be celebrating your wins. All of that. And that's a massive piece. So, however, it's a lot of work, but it's the most worthwhile thing you'll ever do in your life. Plus, think about all of the people around you that you will influence when you start trying to work on yourself. So get us and you out of average as the default and into awesome, even aiming for awesome. I want everybody to up their own bar, and I want kids to see us do that. So that is all of my words and thoughts shared with you today. And now I want to see those being put into action. So you've got all the skills and the tips there that you need. You've got all the information. And now I want you doing some of what I just said there. And I want to hear about it. So I'm on social media, all over my channels. I'm everywhere. Come and find me, or come and have a look on my website, because you'll find all the links up there. So BridaMcKeag.com. And I look forward to hearing from you.
Wow, Breda. I'm almost standing on my desk with all my inspiration and enthusiasm. I don't know how you do it or what that knack you have is, but you've certainly got me going. Thank you for that. You know, as I hear your words, what I immediately do, of course, is reflect on the parts of my life where maybe I'm not following that kind of guidance today. And, you know, kind of thinking about, yes, who are my influencers and how am I kind of, you know, living up to my own potential? I think one of the questions that was coming in kind of speaks to that, and it's around actually the media and social media environment that we're living in today. Because actually, they're quite divisive and could be viewed as negative views in the media. And ultimately what happens is we end up following them to see what they have to say, but we end up in an echo chamber where ultimately we're seeing a lot of the same type of content. And then that's potentially influencing us. So, you know, what are your thoughts on how that is influencing a positive state of mind for us, especially in this kind of strange 2020?
So I would say when I see people saying, I need to take a break from social media, then I could nearly tell you what is in their feed. Because what you're doing there is, first of all, you have a negativity bias that likes negative press because it's familiar. So that's why people follow those negative voices to start with, because that's familiar. Your mind likes familiar. It's easy to engage with. But what happens then is those are the thoughts that start to run in your mind, which then produce emotions and feelings. And that's why people get stressed out listening to social media or being on it. And then they say, social media has me stressed out, and they go off it. And I would say my social media does the total opposite to me, but that's because my feed is totally different. My feed is all people that will teach me something new about positivity. So every time I open my phone, I am learning, and it's inspiring me. And I get that rush that other people get from my motivational talks. I get that every day. And I think that is what we all need to do. So rather that it's a conscious decision, Aoife, and you're right, we're drawn to it, and then we end up in that echo chamber. But you have to consciously decide what you're going to absorb, and your feed right across all of your channels is doing that. It's a massive impact, and most people don't think. They scroll and then they throw the phone there and they feel bad afterwards, and they just they're not sure why, but that is exactly what's happening. So my challenge to everybody is to test yourself on your feed. You imagine if I sat down beside you and I took your phone and I went through your feed, what do you think I would say to you about your feed? So do that for yourself and see how different you feel, how much that opens up your sort of area of interest around your own mind. And when you start learning about that, the amount of opportunities that opens for you is unreal. Your life changes. So never underestimate the small things. We've been talking all evening in different panels about the detail, and there's thousands of small things that make a difference, and that is one of them. So that's my advice to everybody. Imagine I was coming to check your feeds, and before I get there, get it cleansed.
Well, linked to that, another question that's coming in is, who are you following? Your inspirational and motivational people.
Go in and have a look. Some of the ones that I would have recommended years ago where I started, which is a nice sort of easy transition from, you know, average and default way of thinking to a mind mastery sort of way of thinking. Tony Robbins would be one I would recommend to lots of people. I am constantly sending links of his YouTube videos to people. Marissa Peers is amazing. You all have to go and listen to her. I would send a lot of people her way just to listen to her YouTubes. These are free. These are for you to listen to, whether you're sitting at your desk, whether you're cooking in the evenings, you know, rather than sitting watching maybe some binge TV, maybe do something like that and start stirring up your mind and start teaching yourself something totally new, and you watch how you transform. It is magic.
Cool. I think I've got a question from someone who's obviously thinking about how to make this happen in their own life. Because the question is, if you're so active on social media, does it not impact your productivity?
Great question. And it's one a lot of people are trying to figure out. So I'm always teaching people to become more visible, to use those social media channels that you have on your phone free to you, to make sure you're visible, to share your expertise, to share what you've learned. And then they start to panic because they're thinking, how am I going to have an extra hour every day to do a post? I don't have an extra hour every day to do a post. And I've got very good at doing that on the move. So like this morning, while I was on this and I had a break from actually speaking, I had a post gone out because I wanted to make sure that other people that might be on this can see this, and it'll help them connect up with each other. So you don't get extra hours. I can't create extra hours in my week nor in yours. But what you've got to do is find a way to do it on the move. Just build it into your existing day. it only actually takes a couple of minutes. You don't have to do it perfectly. A lot of people starting out, I see them trying to get it so perfect and everything, and they spend more time at that and then they throw it there. Don't do that. One picture, some short few lines, up it goes, stick a hashtag in it if you think of it, job done. And that's the kind of way to do it. It is, honest to God, it's so light. It takes zero time for me. I literally do it on the move all the time.
It's probably a learning curve, and then it's kind of like takes zero time.
Yeah, start small, start with wee bits, keep it nice and simple.
Super. And actually, there's a very nice question that's come in that will maybe round out our conversation quite well, actually, Breda. And the question is, everyone is different and at different places, but what would you recommend as the top 3 things we should add to our New Year's resolutions?
Start with what you have, but start now. So many people that I meet are putting everything off, and they're saying someday I'll do this and someday I'll do that. But life ticks by so fast on us, and our lives are busy. So I would say start with what you have and start now. Find ways of slipping the little things that make you tick into your existing diary. You have the same amount of hours in the day as I have, but I'm choosing to use mine differently because I am hell-bent on getting some of the things that make me tick into my diary. And that is my challenge to every one of you. Figure out what it is that makes you tick, then get it into your daily diary. You've got all evening. You can miss some of the TV once and choose to do something that will actually help you grow. That is what I want to see people do. And you don't have to do it all the time. You don't have to slam yourself, but I need to see those things that make you tick being built in small ways to your week-to-week plan. That's how it works. Can I mention the vision boards, because my poll came back and I had asked in my talk around how many people have vision boards, and we have 87% of people said no and 13% of people said yes. Now that is not a surprise to me, and the reason that I put it in there is I want everybody to think about vision boards. If you don't have a clear vision for yourself, and if you do not have it written up on your wall in pictures and in words, then you're not giving your mind any signposts. So at the minute, 87% of you have not fed your mind signposts to get it to bring you to awesome. And that, I promise you, is an easy thing to do. You literally just get a sheet of paper, you get some pictures and some words, do it with a marker, do it whatever way you can, and get it in ink. I always say to people, think in ink. If it's not written down, it is just a fleeting thought, and that fleeting thought will just leave you. So I want you lot to try vision boards. I have vision boards all over the walls in my room here in my office. And I've seen what vision boards can do when you are signposting clearly to your mind what it is you want in your life. Your mind will find a way of getting you there, but do it a favor. Get some sort of a vision board together tonight.
I was going to say New Year's resolutions, but hey, let's get started. It's November. It's going to be the New Year soon. Yeah. Absolutely. You've inspired me. We won't watch the last bit of The Crown, which most people are actually doing.
Leave The Crown. Watch
vision boards instead.
Yeah, do a vision board for me. And if anybody does one, I'm happy to see your DMs and pictures of it. I want to see what you're at, and I'll help you with them.
Brilliant. That's inspirational and great advice, Breda. Thank you. Well, I actually can't believe it, but we're narrowly approaching the end of our fantastic day. Love to hear, Breda, what are your thoughts from Stream 2 and some of the talks that you've been at today?
Yeah, I actually got goosebumps in some of the conversations that I was listening to this afternoon in Stream 2. This amazing stuff around diversity, around exclusion and the damage that does, how inclusion makes such a difference. We had such amazing stories in there. It was heartwarming, it was inspirational, it was so authentic, it was just amazing. So it really moved me. I thought it was phenomenal. And then we had a case study with Bank of Ireland, who explained how they started small with one of their units and built an entire D&I program from a unit out. So it was like transformation from inside that multiplied. So a phenomenal experience, expertise shared on that one as well for anybody that is trying to figure out how to get better at doing like a D&I program in their organization. So that's what I spent my afternoon at, just in heaven, listening to amazing speakers and conversations that I am so interested in. How was yours, Aoife?
Well, I mean, this afternoon was, I think it was actually eye-opening for me, because we were really getting to grips with how fintech is really helping us kind of change society and really change, you know, some very fundamental things that we've done for centuries, and now it's being done in a different way. And the role of Ireland in the global fintech stage and the European fintech stage is actually, you know, something that's a huge opportunity, and it was great to hear some of the guys talking about that. We then continue the conversation to talk about payments, and while ultimately it's a fintech and a technology discussion, again, the societal impact of some of the real disruption and acceleration that we have in that industry is really the discussion point. That's the topic. And you know, there's a real generational aspect to that, which is not fully unlocked, I think, and not fully unpicked, but you know, certainly at the front of mind in terms of how fintech is moving ahead. So it was really educational, really interesting, and actually, when I reflect back on the morning, you know, there's a real thread going through some of these discussions that, you know, diversity is becoming less of a front of mind issue, because it's, you know, these teams are very blended, and it's a space that, you know, gives huge opportunity for diverse teams. So it actually complements, I think, the conversations in the stream too really, really well. So I've learned a lot today.
Yeah, I would agree. Sounds like a fascinating discussion, and I'm going to look those up when the recording comes out next week, which helps me to remind everybody else that if you missed any of the sessions today, you will be able to pick them up on the recording, and that will be in your inbox at some point next week. So you can dabble in and out then of some of the talks that you've missed, which is a brilliant facility. So I want to hear if you've seen a talk next week. Don't be shy about DMing us, letting us know what you thought when you finally get time to watch it. I have a question for you, Aoife, around a pledge, because I think, you know, at the end of every good event, I always love to see us doing a little piece of action or change. So now we have vision boards to do, but we wanted a pledge as well. So I was going to ask you, what would you like to your pledge to be? And then what we're going to do is tweet out our pledges later.
Well, I guess I feel like I need two pledges, one for my own self and one for me as a leader of teams. So I don't know if it's breaking the rules to have two pledges, but I think, you know, I had a few sessions throughout today about things we can do personally, and actually what I think my pledge needs to be is something that you talked about, Breda, which is really understanding who your influencers are and shaking that up if we think, you know, if we consider our outlook being an average of that. So I have a pledge to actually ensure that, you know, the forces that are influencing me are positive and leading to a positive mindset for me. So that's my self-pledge. I think as a leader, I feel like sometimes we forget that, you know, how important the diversity agenda is, because it feels like, oh my, you know, there's a lot of women in leadership. You know, I don't feel I've ever been, you know, overlooked myself. And, you know, sometimes it can be easy to forget that actually, if we don't put focus on the diversity and inclusion agenda overall, and not just the female one, that, you know, the stats do actually drop. So for me, there's a second pledge about, you know, reaffirming my commitment to the inclusion and diversity agenda in my own teams and in my own organization, and firming down on that in 2021.
Brilliant. Awesome. Awesome. Well, my pledge is going to be to raise more awareness of lean-in circles in Ireland. And I want to do that because lean-in circles have changed many lives for many women. And I want that to happen for more. I want men and women mentoring each other, peer mentoring each other. And that is a free model that works. It's on www.leanin.org. And I want more people to try that and see what you can do for yourself to self-drive and bring yourself out of your comfort zone. And yes, you can do that in a virtual world. I do it all the time. So that's my pledge, to try and continue to raise more awareness. And if anybody else wants to help me with that, please do. Yeah, so that's our pledges done. And then what we wanted to do as well is a shout out to everybody that has joined us today to see what else you would like to see at the WIT Summit in 2021. What other topics perhaps you would have liked to see more of, or even before 2021, things may change on us. There might be topics that you come across between now and sort of mid next year. Let us know what it is you would like to see more of, or if you've got ideas that would help the WIF community, the Women in Finance community, please do let us know. So that's it. I think that sums up our day. We're going to have Tom on now to close us out. It's been such a pleasure for me. I've really, really enjoyed my day. You were great company, Aoife. Thank you for being such a fabulous co-host. It's been lovely to get to know you, and I'm looking forward to seeing how many other people get in touch later. And let's build our community out, because women in finance need this community. We need to drive it on, and we need the girls coming behind us to walk into an industry that is in good nick, where they can bring their skills and their expertise and get promoted and make decisions at the right tables. So brilliant day. Thank you so much from me. Over to you, Aoife, to do your goodbyes for the evening.
Thanks, Breda, and I will echo my thanks. Thanks for being the consummate professional and keeping us all on the straight and narrow all day. Yeah, again, I do feel like, you know, even the community that we've created by coming together today is something that I'd love to see maintained as we move into 2021, be it on LinkedIn, be it on Twitter, or whatever forums that we think, you know, we've created this community of people now. Let's continue that. So thank you all for your fantastic participation today. There's loads of questions and interaction, which is always fantastic. Thank you so much to all the facilitators and panelists who worked really, really hard to prepare. And I think you probably all saw that through the conversations. And I hope you have a fantastic evening and weekend. Thank you all.
Thank you, Aoife and Breda, for your works and support throughout the day. You've both been fantastic. Thank you to everyone that's joined us this year. It's been a new and wonderful experience. Thank you to all of our speakers for their insights and recommendations. And also thanks again to our sponsors, Accenture and Ernst & Young, for your support. We'd love to know what you thought about the event today, and there's going to be a short survey sent around. So if you could get that in as soon as you receive that in your inbox, that would be fantastic, and it would do me a world of good as well. It'll give me a head start on next year. Now, all of the sessions, again, will be recorded. So if you missed any, or if you want to go back and see some of the sessions you did see, they will be on the platform next week. Now, our last event this year is Women in IT Asia, and that will be on Wednesday, the 9th of December. So if you have any colleagues or contacts in your network that would like to see that, please direct them towards that. And with that, I want to say thank you again. I look forward to seeing you all next year. Stay safe. Bye for now.